It was a crisp Monday morning at Sterling Technologies, a company renowned for its cutting-edge software solutions. Richard Sterling, the young and arrogant CEO, strutted into the marble-clad lobby with his usual air of superiority. He believed he was untouchable. He had risen quickly to the top, earning the position through ruthless ambition and a talent for backroom deals. But Richard had one big problem: he hated being challenged. He was determined to prove that he could make decisions without being second-guessed, no matter how petty or ridiculous. That morning, while sipping his latte, Richard noticed something that set his teeth on edge. Walter, one of the janitors, was mopping the floor near the elevators, whistling quietly to himself. Walter was a tall, older black man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He'd been with the company for years, always friendly and hardworking. But today, something about him annoyed Richard. "Hey, you!" Richard barked, walking up to him. "You're not supposed to be here during business hours. You're distracting everyone. Do that at night." Walter stopped mopping and looked at him calmly. "Morning, Mr. Sterling. Just doing my job. This floor needed an urgent cleanup." Richard sneered. "Your job is whatever I say it is. You're done here. Pack up your things and leave." The lobby fell silent. The few employees present exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared to intervene. Walter tilted his head, as if considering Richard's words. Then he smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "All right, Mr. Sterling. If that's how you want it." He put down his mop, removed his gloves, and walked toward the exit. But before leaving, he turned back. "I wish you the best of luck, Richard. You're going to need it." And with that, Walter disappeared through the doors. The fallout begins. At first, Richard felt triumphant. One less annoyance in his day. But his satisfaction didn't last long. That same afternoon, strange things started happening. First, his assistant barged into his office, looking pale. "Sir, there's a problem with payroll. Half the employees didn't get paid this morning." "Fix it," Richard said, barely looking up from his computer. But it didn't stop there. Over the next 24 hours, crucial contracts fell through, key partnerships dissolved without explanation, and the company's stock price began to nosedive. By Wednesday morning, the board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. Richard strode into the boardroom, confident he could talk his way out of any situation. But as soon as he entered, he froze. Sitting at the head of the table, in the chair reserved for the chairman of the board, was Walter. He wasn't wearing his janitor uniform. He was dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, exuding quiet authority. "Good morning, Richard," Walter said, smiling that same calm smile. What's going on?" Richard stammered. Walter leaned back in his chair. "You see, Richard, I'm not just a janitor. I'm also the majority shareholder of Sterling Technologies." The room went silent. Richard's jaw dropped. Walter continued, "I've owned this company for years. I like to keep a low profile, so I spend my time where I can see the real heart of this place, among the people who do the hard work. The people you overlook." Richard felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. "This has to be some kind of joke." "No joke," Walter said. "When you fired me, you crossed a line. You didn't just disrespect me, you disrespected every hardworking person in this building. I've spent too long watching people like you take advantage of others. So, I've decided it's time for a change. The tables turn." Walter stood up and addressed the board. Effective immediately, Richard Sterling is relieved of his duties as CEO. I'll personally oversee the transition to new leadership. Richard's face turned red. You can't do this. I made this company what it is. Walter chuckled softly. No, Richard. The people you ignored, the janitors, the secretaries, the developers in the basement, they made this company what it is. You just took the credit. Security guards entered the room. Please escort Mr. Sterling out of the building, Walter said. Richard tried to protest, but it was useless. As he was dragged out of the boardroom, the weight of what had just happened finally hit him. The aftermath. Walter took over as interim CEO and made swift changes. He reinstated fair practices, improved working conditions, and made it clear that no one, not even a janitor, would ever be treated as less than again. Under his leadership, Sterling Technologies thrived. Employees felt valued, innovation soared, and the company's reputation was restored. And as for Richard? He faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale told around office water coolers. Walter, however, remained a legend, not because he owned the company, but because he reminded everyone of the power of humility, kindness, and the importance of treating every person with respect. Richard's plot for revenge. Weeks passed, and the dust seemed to settle at Sterling Technologies. Walter's leadership was proving wildly successful, and employees were happier than they'd been in years. Profits soared, and the company's stock price climbed back up. But Richard Sterling wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat quietly. His humiliation burned deep, and he was determined to take back what he thought was rightfully his. They think they've seen the last of me, he muttered, sitting in the dim light of a bar late at night. Not a chance. Using the last of his connections, Richard hired a high-profile corporate spy, a woman named Sasha West, known for her cunning and ability to infiltrate companies undetected. Her mission? Find dirt on Walter, sabotage the company, and create enough chaos to force him out. Give me a month, Sasha promised with a sly smile. By then, Walter will be begging to step down. The infiltration. Sasha posed as a marketing consultant and was quickly hired by one of Sterling Technologies' subsidiary divisions. She worked quietly at first, gathering information and studying Walter's every move. But something strange happened as she observed him. Unlike the CEOs she had taken down before, Walter didn't fit the typical mold. He didn't bark orders or rule through fear. Instead, he spent time listening to employees, asking for their input, and genuinely caring about their lives. He knew the janitors by name, celebrated birthdays, and often stayed late just to talk with the night crew. Sasha found herself torn. She had expected an arrogant, corrupt leader, but what she saw was a man who seemed too good to be true. Still, she had a job to do. One night, she snuck into the executive offices, searching for anything she could use against Walter. Financial irregularities, hidden scandals, anything. What she found, however, was far more shocking than she had imagined. A hidden past. In a locked drawer in Walter's office, Sasha discovered an old photograph. It showed a younger Walter standing with a group of men in front of an old building, a factory. On the back of the photo were the words, "The beginning of Sterling Industries, 1985. Her heart skipped a beat. Walter wasn't just the majority shareholder, he had helped found the company. Sasha dug deeper and uncovered an even bigger bombshell. Richard's father, the company's original CEO, had betrayed Walter decades ago. Walter had been one of the 3 original partners who built Sterling Technologies from the ground up. But when the company started gaining traction, Richard's father had forced Walter out, taking full credit for its success and leaving him with a small percentage of shares, just enough to keep him quiet. Walter never sought revenge. Instead, he quietly held onto his shares, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was his. Sasha leaned back, her mind racing. She realized she had been hired to destroy a man who had already been wronged once before. The turning point. The next morning, Sasha met Richard in a parking garage. "We're done," she said coldly, tossing the photograph at his feet. "Walter's the real deal. You were the villain all along." Richard's face twisted with rage. "I don't care what you found. This is my company. I won't stop until I take him down." But Sasha had already made her decision. "Good luck doing it without me," she said, walking away. Richard was now truly alone. The final showdown. Desperate, Richard decided to go nuclear. He used his last remaining resources to launch a hostile takeover attempt, buying up shares through proxy investors and trying to force a shareholder vote to remove Walter. The company was thrown into turmoil as news of the attempted takeover spread. Employees were panicked, unsure of what the future held. Walter, however, remained calm. He called an emergency town hall meeting, inviting every single employee, from executives to janitors, to join him in the main auditorium. "I won't lie to you," he said, standing on the stage. "This company is under attack. Richard Sterling wants to take it back, and if he succeeds, things will go back to the way they were. But I believe in this company, and I believe in all of you. Together, we can stop him." The room erupted into applause. Employees rallied together, pooling their resources to buy shares and prevent Richard's takeover. Even rival companies, impressed by Walter's integrity, offered their support. The victory. In the end, Richard's hostile takeover failed spectacularly. His proxies abandoned him, unwilling to go up against the united front Walter had built. With his reputation in shambles and no allies left, Richard disappeared from the business world for good. Walter, meanwhile, cemented his place as a legend in the corporate world. Sterling Technologies became a beacon of innovation and fairness, known for its employee-first culture. And as for Sasha? Walter offered her a permanent position at the company, not as a spy, but as head of corporate security and ethics, ensuring that no one else could ever threaten Sterling Technologies again. "I could use someone with your skills," Walter said with a wink. She accepted. Epilogue. Years later, Walter retired and passed the reins to a new generation of leaders, but his story became company lore. His framed photograph from 1985 hung in the lobby, a reminder that true leadership isn't about power or status, it's about resilience, humility, and doing what's right. And every day, employees walked past that photo, grateful to work for a company built on a foundation far stronger than profit, respect, and second chances. Richard's return. For years, Richard Sterling lived in exile, consumed by his failure. His wealth dwindled, his once powerful network turned its back on him, and he was reduced to living a shadow of his former life. No more luxury suits, no more first-class flights, just a cramped apartment and endless regrets. But even in his darkest moments, Richard plotted a comeback. He couldn't let it end like this. He spent every waking hour studying the market, following Sterling Technologies' every move. He knew the company better than anyone, even Walter. "If I can't take the company by force," Richard thought, "I'll take it another way. Through redemption." The proposal. One foggy Monday morning, Richard walked back into Sterling Technologies for the first time in years. He wore a modest suit, his once pristine hair now streaked with gray. Security nearly stopped him at the door, but Walter, ever the man of second chances, allowed him in. In the executive boardroom, Richard stood in front of the company's leadership. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "I'm here to make things right." He presented a bold proposal. "Let me work for you, not as a leader, but as a strategist. I know this company inside and out. I want to help it grow, and I'll do it on your terms. No power plays, no secret agendas. Just a chance to prove I've changed. The room was tense. Walter leaned back, studying Richard's face. You burned a lot of bridges, he said. Why should we trust you? You shouldn't, Richard admitted. Not yet. But give me a chance to earn it. A new beginning, or is it? Against the advice of his board, Walter agreed. He gave Richard a temporary position in business development, a far cry from the glory of the CEO's office, but a step toward redemption. At first, employees were skeptical. Some refused to work with Richard, still bitter over his past actions. But slowly, he began to win them over. Richard humbled himself in ways no one had expected. He stayed late, worked weekends, and took on the most tedious tasks without complaint. He mentored younger employees, helping them avoid the mistakes he had made. Even Sasha, now head of corporate security, started to believe that maybe, just maybe, Richard had truly changed. The shadow in the background. But things were never quite what they seemed. Unbeknownst to everyone, Richard had been quietly building a secret partnership with an outside investor, a powerful hedge fund known for hostile takeovers. He had convinced them that Sterling Technologies was vulnerable and ripe for the taking. All Richard needed was one final piece, insider information on the company's long-term strategy. His plan was simple: earn Walter's trust, gain access to confidential plans, and then strike when they least expected it. The betrayal. One evening, Richard found himself alone in Walter's office. The place hadn't changed much, except for the safe tucked into the corner, which held the company's most sensitive documents. His heart raced as he entered the combination, one he had learned through months of observation. Inside, he found exactly what he was looking for: a detailed blueprint of Sterling Technologies' next 5-year expansion plan. He snapped photos of the documents and slipped them back into the safe. As he turned to leave, he froze. Walter was standing in the doorway. Going somewhere? Walter asked calmly. The final twist. Richard's mouth went dry. Walter, it's not what it looks like. Oh, it's exactly what it looks like, Walter said, stepping into the office. I knew you couldn't resist. That safe? It's bait. Those documents are fake. Richard's eyes widened. Walter smiled. I've been watching you since the day you came back. Did you really think I'd believe you wanted redemption? People like you don't change. You want power. But I wanted to give you just enough rope to hang yourself. At that moment, Sasha and 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. We've got everything on tape, she said, holding up a tablet. The photos, the investor meetings, the whole scheme. Richard knew he was finished. The end of the line. The next morning, news of Richard's arrest spread like wildfire. Sterling Technologies issued a press release detailing the failed takeover attempt, and Walter used the opportunity to reinforce the company's values of transparency and integrity. Richard, once again, disappeared from public life, this time for good. As for Walter, he continued to lead the company with the same quiet strength and humility that had made him a legend. Some people never change, he told Sasha one day. But it's always worth giving them a chance to prove us wrong. Sasha nodded. Just make sure we're watching when they do. Epilogue: the legacy lives on. Years later, Walter retired for real, passing the reins to a new CEO, a young woman who had started at the company as an intern. Walter remained an advisor, watching proudly as Sterling Technologies grew into a global powerhouse. In the end, it wasn't just a story about a janitor who owned the company. It was a story about integrity, redemption, and knowing when to give second chances, and when to stop giving them. And so, the legend of Walter lived on, not just in the company, but in the hearts of everyone who worked there. Richard's rise from the ashes. Years passed, and everyone believed Richard Sterling was gone for good. After being arrested for corporate espionage, he had served a prison sentence that should have broken him. But prison didn't break Richard, it transformed him. While behind bars, he studied law, corporate strategy, and cybersecurity, determined to become more powerful than ever. He spent hours reading every book he could find on white-collar warfare, making connections with shadowy figures in the tech and finance worlds. By the time he was released, Richard had become more dangerous than ever before. His charm had returned, but it was sharper, colder. He had a new plan, one that didn't rely on insider deals or brute force takeovers. This time, he was going to destroy Walter's legacy from the inside out. The master plan. Richard quietly re-entered the business world under a new identity, Victor Blackstone, a tech entrepreneur with a mysterious past. No one recognized him, he had changed his appearance, adopting a salt-and-pepper beard and wearing glasses. His voice was softer, his demeanor more humble. Under this new persona, Victor Blackstone founded Shadowvale Ventures, a private equity firm specializing in acquiring promising tech startups. His goal was simple: gain control of the key suppliers and strategic partners of Sterling Technologies, slowly choking the company's supply chain without anyone realizing it. His moves were subtle but devastating. He acquired several software companies that Sterling relied on for their core services, jacking up prices and delaying deliveries. He manipulated the media, planting negative stories about Sterling Technologies' leadership. He hacked into Sterling's internal systems, causing subtle glitches that frustrated employees and clients alike. Within months, Sterling Technologies was struggling. Walter's final fight. Though retired, Walter had been watching the company closely. When the strange disruptions began, his instincts kicked in. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. Walter called a meeting with Sasha and the new CEO, Amara Patel, a brilliant strategist in her own right. Together, they analyzed the situation and quickly realized that all roads led back to Shadowvale Ventures. But what stunned them was Victor Blackstone's true identity. "It's him," Walter said, staring at a grainy photo of Richard, now Victor, on Sasha's screen. "I knew he wouldn't stay down." "We should go public," Amara suggested. "Expose him." But Walter shook his head. "No. This time, we fight him on his turf." The counter-strike. Walter and Amara devised a bold counter-plan. Instead of exposing Richard immediately, they fed him false information, creating fake vulnerabilities in Sterling's supply chain to lure him into overextending his resources. At the same time, Sasha worked behind the scenes to gather hard evidence of Richard's illegal activities. She reached out to her old contacts in the cybersecurity world, building an airtight case that would not only expose Richard's sabotage but also reveal his true identity to the public. The trap was set. The final showdown. Richard, or rather, Victor, thought he had won. Sterling Technologies was on the brink of collapse, its stock price plummeting, investors losing confidence. But just as he prepared to launch his final strike, everything fell apart. One morning, the headlines hit. Shadowvale CEO Victor Blackstone exposed as former convicted CEO Richard Sterling, caught in new sabotage scandal. Richard's phone exploded with calls. His investors fled, the media descended on his offices, and regulators launched an immediate investigation. But the real blow came when Walter himself appeared on national television. "Richard Sterling tried to destroy us once before," Walter said calmly, sitting across from a prominent news anchor. "He failed then, and he's failed now. But this isn't just about business, it's about doing what's right. And no matter how many times he comes back, we'll always be ready." Richard's last stand. Cornered and desperate, Richard decided to flee the country. He liquidated his remaining assets and booked a private jet under yet another false identity. But Sasha was one step ahead. As Richard boarded the plane, federal agents stormed the tarmac and took him into custody. This time, the charges were far more serious: fraud, corporate sabotage, identity theft, and conspiracy. There would be no escape. The end of Richard Sterling. Richard Sterling, once the golden boy of the corporate world, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His name became synonymous with corporate greed and deceit, a cautionary tale for future generations. The legacy continues. With Richard gone for good, Sterling Technologies entered a new golden age. Amara Patel led the company into the future, expanding into new markets and embracing cutting-edge innovations. Walter remained a trusted advisor, but he finally allowed himself to enjoy a quiet life, spending time with his family, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and occasionally dropping by the office to share stories of the old days. As for Sasha, she continued her work, ensuring that the company stayed true to its values. Every now and then, she'd glance at the photo of Walter in the lobby and smile, knowing that the fight for what's right was always worth it. And in the hearts of everyone at Sterling Technologies, one thing was clear. Evil might come back, but integrity and resilience will always win in the end. 15 years later, the return no one expected. The world had nearly forgotten Richard Sterling. His name was buried in business textbooks under corporate scandals of the 21st century. Walter was well into his retirement, Sterling Technologies was thriving, and Amara Patel had become one of the most respected CEOs in the tech industry. But far away, in a remote European city, a shadow moved in silence. Richard Sterling was free. After 15 years in prison, Richard had managed to reduce his sentence for good behavior. He had disappeared without a trace, using a hidden offshore account to fund a quiet but calculated comeback. This time, he had no interest in destroying Sterling Technologies. He wanted revenge on the people who had betrayed him personally. Walter, Sasha, Amara. And he wasn't coming back alone. The secret conspiracy. Richard had spent years building a network of loyal followers, disgruntled former executives, black hat hackers, and corrupt financiers. Together, they formed a covert organization called Phantom Syndicate, specializing in bringing down powerful corporations. No more boardroom games, Richard said to his inner circle. This time, we hit them where it hurts the most, personally. He began by launching coordinated cyber attacks on Sterling employees' private lives. Personal data was leaked, false scandals were fabricated, and the company's top executives found themselves embroiled in controversies they couldn't explain. But Richard's true masterpiece was still to come. Walter's disappearance. One evening, Walter vanished. He had been last seen walking into his favorite coffee shop, but after that, nothing. No phone calls, no sightings. He was gone. Amara and Sasha were frantic. "This has Richard written all over it," Sasha said. "We need to find him before it's too late." They hired the best private investigators, but Richard had covered his tracks perfectly. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. Until a mysterious message appeared on Sasha's secure server. "Miss me? RS." Attached was a video, Walter sitting calmly in a dark room, hands tied, but otherwise unharmed. "Hello, old friends," Richard said, stepping into frame. "It's been a while. I thought it was time we had one last chat." The final ultimatum. Richard made his demands clear. "Amara. Sasha. You've taken everything from me. Now, you're going to give it back. Step down from Sterling Technologies and publicly admit that you sabotaged me years ago. Do that, and Walter walks free." refuse, and, well, let's just say Walter's retirement won't last much longer. Amara's hands clenched into fists. We can't negotiate with him. Sasha nodded. We need to turn the tables. The ultimate trap. Using every resource at their disposal, Sasha and Amara set up a fake negotiation. They agreed to meet Richard at an abandoned industrial complex outside the city, pretending to comply with his demands. Richard, always confident in his superiority, took the bait. He arrived with a small entourage of mercenaries, dragging Walter with him. Smart choice, Richard said with a sly grin. Now, hand over the company. But just as he stepped forward, the lights flickered on, and federal agents surrounded the building. It's over, Richard, Sasha said, stepping out of the shadows. We've been tracking you since the moment you got out of prison. Richard's eyes narrowed. You think you've won? We don't think, Amara said. We know. The final defeat. Richard made one last attempt to escape, but there was nowhere left to run. This time, the evidence against him was overwhelming: kidnapping, cyber-terrorism, conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, he glanced back at Walter one last time. This isn't over, he muttered. Legends never die. But Walter only smiled. You're right, Richard. Legends don't die. But villains, they always fall. The true ending. With Richard gone for good, peace finally returned to Sterling Technologies. Walter retired once and for all, moving to a quiet seaside town where he spent his days writing memoirs and watching the sunset. Amara and Sasha remained at the helm of the company, continuing to build on the foundation of integrity and resilience Walter had left behind. And Richard Sterling? His name faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale told to business students and aspiring CEOs. A symbol of greed, betrayal, and how obsession can destroy even the most powerful. As for Sterling Technologies, it stood tall, a monument to those who believe that doing the right thing always wins in the end. Epilogue: one last twist. Years later, a mysterious book appeared on Walter's doorstep. It was bound in black leather, with no return address. Inside, a single handwritten note. Legends never die. See you soon. R.S. Walter smiled. He closed the book, tossed it into the fire, and watched the flames consume it. Not this time, Richard, he whispered. And with that, the saga finally came to an end.